The presenter is Professor Masangyun, Professor of Catholic University of Korea, on retrospection and prospect on 80 years of division. Please.
Hello everyone, my name is Sangyun Ma. I'm a professor at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you for inviting me to this very wonderful panel. I feel very much prestiged. It seems I present papers on unification or inter-Korean relations roughly once every decade. I was invited to the 60th anniversary of liberation and 70th, and this time 8 years. But I vividly still remember how challenging it was each time, because no matter how hard I tried and pondered, I couldn't find a clear answer as to how unification could be achieved. Well, in this paper, I try to look back of our approaches in the past, and at the same time try to ponder some of the principles that we have to maintain in order to achieve unification in the future. I try to reflect firstly on the persistent challenges of Korean unification. This is a topic, as I just mentioned, that I've revisited for major anniversaries. In my 2005 paper, I tried to look back, and I described efforts to improve inter-Korean relations as the regrettable efforts of Sisyphus. I wanted to note that despite 2 decades of passing since 2005, the situation here in the Korean Peninsula has only worsened. Geopolitical competition has intensified, and North Korea has effectively become a nuclear state, declaring a hostile two-state theory and abandoning unification as a goal. Concurrently, South Korean society, particularly its younger generation, shows waning enthusiasm for unification, with a growing preference for peaceful coexistence. This sets the stage for the paper's central question: why this has happened, and should unification still be pursued, and if so, how? Now, let me turn to history of Korean division and try to draw some lessons from it. Korea's division began in 1945 after the liberation from Imperial Japan, with the United States and Soviet Union establishing military rule along the 38th parallel. Despite initial intention for temporary trusteeship, the Soviet Union quickly moved to communize North Korea. It should be noted, as soon as the Red Army reached North Korea, it formally closed the 38th parallel and severed communication and exchanges with the South. It was even before the arrival of American forces to South Korea. In the South, political factions clashed, with Seungman Rhee advocating for a separate anti-communist government and Kim Gu pushing for a unified Korea. The burgeoning Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union favored Seungman Rhee's stance. Attempts to establish a unified Korean government through the US-Soviet Joint Commission failed, leading the issue of establishing a unified Korean government to the United Nations. North Korea's refusal of UN-supervised election resulted in the establishment of the Republic of Korea, the South Korea, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north shortly after, formalizing the division. The aspiration for unification persisted, however, even through using military forces. Kim Il-sung's invasion of South Korea in June 1950, supported by the Soviet Union and Communist China, led to the Korean War. While a truce was achieved in July 1953, the brutal conflict merely replaced the 38th parallel with the military demarcation line, deepening the division and hostility between the North and South. After the armistice, Syngman Rhee's desire for marching north unification was rejected by the United States, which prioritized South Korea's defense and economic development. The policy of construction first, unification afterwards emerged after Syngman Rhee's overthrow in 1960, shifting the focus to system competition between the two Koreas. Competition regarding economic performance, political systems, and national legitimacy, with the underlying belief that proving system superiority would lead to unification. This competition was fierce until the 1980s, when South Korea's economic growth began to shift the balance. The process of Korean division, as described above, yield, I think, two key implications. First, it should be emphasized that both international and domestic factors contributed to the division and its deepening, suggesting that unification efforts must similarly address both dimensions in parallel. Second, the long-standing Cold War competition effectively postponed unification, and the premises that system victory would immediately lead to unification proved incorrect. Unification isn't automatically achieved by proving the superiority of a system. It requires special efforts and the measures of good luck, maybe. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, German reunification in 1990, and the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991 signaled the end of the Cold War and its ideological confrontation. This era seemingly brought an end to the system competition on the Korean Peninsula as well. North Korea became diplomatically isolated, and the economic gap with the South Korea widened significantly, more than 10 times by 1991. South Korea's democratization after 1983 further mitigated Seoul's political vulnerabilities. With South Korea's effective victory in the system competition, expectation for unification under its leadership grew. The Notae government's Nordpolitik led to the Inter-Korean Basic Agreement and simultaneous UN entry for both Koreas. These achievements, along with Germany's reunification, raised expectations for Korean unification. In particular, there was an expectation for an imminent collapse of North Korean regime. However, this expectation did not materialize. Instead, North Korea embarked on a serious nuclear weapons development in response to its post-Cold War crisis. The first nuclear crisis erupted in 1993, and despite a agreed framework between the United States and North Korea, the second crisis emerged in 2002. Since then, denuclearization has dominated the Korean Peninsula agenda, with unification largely fading from the international discourse. North Korea's nuclear ambitions, rooted in its necessity of self-defense and survival after losing international support, culminated in 6 nuclear tests by 2016. South Korea's attempts to address this problem through both appeasement and hardline policies failed to achieve denuclearization or accelerated peaceful reunification. North Korea's tactics and strategies for evading international economic sanctions, coupled with China's minimal support and internal domestic regime control allowed North Korea to withstand outside pressures. Appeasement policies aimed at alleviating North Korea's security concerns, ironically, were also viewed by Pyongyang as dangerous, as they could lead to information inflow and internal unrest. Based on the above observation, we can conclude that both collapse theory and hope for reform and probably a Chinese-style development model applied in North Korea were both wishful thinking. The North Korean regime has established a survival formula based on isolation, internal surveillance and control, and nuclear deterrence. South Korean policy have failed to neutralize this formula so far, and unfortunately, there seems to be little prospect of that happening in the near future. The Moon Jae-in government's Korean Peninsula peace process, marked by the Inter-Korean and DPRK US summits in 2018 and 2019, initially raised high hopes, but ultimately failed after the Hanoi summit in 2019. This failure underscored the limitations of appeasement policies. Current North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, despite its initial appearance of sincerity in negotiations, ultimately prioritized regime safety and demonstrated no intention of relinquishing nuclear weapons. In the meantime, after the failure of the Hanoi summit, international environment has further complicated the situation, with accelerating strategic competition between the United States and China and the ongoing war in Ukraine. This so-called new Cold War era of geopolitical chaos benefits North Korea, expanding its diplomatic maneuvering space. China, while advocating North Korea's denuclearization in principle, prioritized maintaining North Korean regime as a buffer zone against the United States. North Korea has effectively leveraged China's strategic interest, as seen in Chinese President Xi Jinping's increased engagement with Kim Jong-un around the year 2018 and 2019. Currently, North Korea is strengthening its ties with Russians, providing artillery and troops support for the war in Ukraine in exchange for economic assistance and potentially sensitive military technologies, such as the technologies for ICBM re-entry vehicle, strategic nuclear submarine reactors, reconnaissance satellite. Russia's recent veto on the extension of the UN panel of experts on DPRK sanctions further weakens monitoring of North Korean violation. North Korea aims to develop nuclear attack capabilities against the United States, seeking international recognition as a nuclear state through arms control talks and ultimately normalization of DPRK-US relations. This could lead to a peace treaty replacing current armistice and raise questions about the continued presence of US forces in Korea and the continuation of ROK-US alliance, particularly given President Donald Trump's negative views on the alliance cost to the United States. While the future Trump administration's approach to North Korea is not yet publicized, Trump himself seems to have a strong interest in resuming dialogue with Kim Jong-un. However, the prospect of US DPRK dialogue is not bright, in my view, and any decisions made without considering South Korea's security concerns, such as acknowledging North Korea's nuclear status or withdrawing USFK, would be problematic for South Korea. Given these complex security concerns, South Korea finds it difficult to prioritize unification. Instead, security and peace are likely to be taken urgent policy priority. Within South Korean society, skepticism towards unification has grown due to the lack of progress on denuclearization and increasing animosity toward North Korea. The younger generation in particular is increasingly open to the idea of peaceful coexistence, simply living separately without conflict. This notion of peaceful coexistence strangely aligns with North Korea's recent declaration of the two hostile state theory, both moving away from the long-held goal of overcoming division. Because achieving unification has become even more difficult, in the short term, prioritizing peace and stability over unification is, I think, a little bit unavoidable. The primary task then should be to transform North Korea's hostile two-state doctrine into a peaceful two-state relationship. However, I'd like to caution that even, it is very difficult to achieve the objective of the peaceful coexistence. And that, even if it is achieved, stability of such coexistence is questionable due to the shared ethnic identity and the inherent awareness of each other as subjects of comparison. While peaceful coexistence can be an interim step, it cannot be the ultimate goal. Peaceful and stable peace can only be achieved through unification that overcomes division. South Korea must exert maximum efforts to stabilize its relationship with North Korea in the short term, recognizing that peaceful coexistence, while a desirable short-term goal, but at the same time we will have to remember it should be a provisional and can be unstable. Also, South Korea should not hastily rush out of desperation into a hasty deal. Instead, it better consistently do what's possible under a long-term vision. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mar. It's really interesting and sad to hear that Professor Mar delivers paper on Korean division and unification once every 10 years. And then I'm really wondering what kind of paper he will deliver in 2035, in 10 years. But before that, we need to make an effort to resolve the Korean division and also